the baby brides of Christ. Picture this. You're 6 years old, still figuring out how to braid your hair, when suddenly your parents tell you, "Congrats, you're married now." Not to a boy, though, to Jesus. That's exactly what happened in medieval Europe when noble families decided their daughters were better off locked away in convents than costing money at home. Being handed to the church wasn't just about holiness, it was economic strategy. Dowries for convent placement were cheaper than dowries for actual marriage. So voila, child nun. Now, what did life look like for these tiny brides of Christ? Imagine endless chanting you barely understand, eating boiled cabbage forever, and getting scolded for laughing. And since you were technically married to Jesus, your body was now considered property of the church. Forget sneaking cookies or pulling pranks. Any slip-up was treated as a sin against your divine husband. The irony? Half the girls barely knew what married even meant. And while families framed this as an honor, it was really closer to medieval child labor. Convents needed bodies to keep the prayers flowing, fields worked, and laundry scrubbed. Think less Disney Princess Castle, more unpaid internship with a vow of silence. So yes, some 6-year-olds in medieval Europe spent their childhoods cloistered behind stone walls, learning Latin prayers instead of hopscotch. Basically kindergarten, but with a wedding ring you couldn't take off. The lock-in ceremony. Here's the medieval plot twist. Once you were in, you were in. The ritual of binding a child nun to her convent often looked more like a funeral than a wedding. Families would dress the little girl in a white robe, walk her into the convent chapel, and then, get this, seal the doors shut behind her. Symbolically, she had died to the world. In reality, she was just a terrified 9-year-old locked away with no escape clause. The ceremony sometimes included the child lying flat on the ground while a black funeral cloth was thrown over her body, like she was being buried alive. Super comforting, right? Nothing says welcome to your new life like pretending you're dead in front of your entire family. And the kicker? Once the vows were made, there was no going back. Breaking them was considered not just a sin, but a crime. Girls who tried to leave could face punishment, imprisonment, or being dragged back by their own families. It was less, choose your own adventure, and more, congratulations, you've unlocked permanent life sentence mode. Imagine being 10 years old, hearing the doors slam, and realizing the rest of your married life was going to be spent scrubbing altar cloths and singing Gregorian chants. Modern kids complain about Wi-Fi dead zones. Try growing up in a convent with literal dead zone energy. Puberty behind stone walls. Adolescence. For most kids, it's awkward crushes, braces, and regrettable haircut choices. For medieval child nuns, puberty was a whole different horror show. Because remember, your body didn't belong to you. It belonged to the church, and everything about it had to stay pure. Translation: your changing body was treated like a liability. When girls hit puberty inside the convent, strict rules tightened around them. Talking too much? Seen? Looking in a mirror? Vanity? Laughing with another nun your age? Suspicious. Friendships were monitored in case they got too close. Some abbesses even ordered inspections of bedding or locked girls into solitary cells if they seemed too affectionate. Middle school sleepovers don't sound so bad now, do they? Worse, the church was obsessed with temptation. As soon as your body began looking adult, the suspicion never stopped. If you so much as sneezed at the wrong time, someone would assume you were flirting with Satan. Even hunger was reframed. Did you want food, or were you secretly lusting for something else? Convent life basically turned normal hormones into evidence of corruption. So while outside girls were dancing at festivals and meeting potential husbands, inside girls were trained to see their own bodies as traitors. Growing up in a convent was like having puberty policed by Big Brother. Except Big Brother wore a cross and loved guilt-tripping. The food punishments. Now let's talk about food, or rather, the lack of it. Child nuns didn't exactly get 3 balanced meals a day. Meals were supposed to be an exercise in humility, so picture boiled vegetables, crusty bread so hard it could chip a tooth, and watery ale. And if you thought picky eating was an option, think again. Refuse your meal? Congratulations, you've just committed a sin of pride. Sometimes fasting was forced on the girls as a punishment. Did you talk too much in chapel? Skip dinner? Did you laugh at the wrong time? Say goodbye to breakfast. And remember, these were children, still growing, being told hunger was good for the soul. By the time adolescence hit, some girls were so malnourished they fainted during prayers. That wasn't treated as a health crisis. It was framed as holiness, like, oh look, little Agnes is collapsing again. How saintly. And don't even think about sneaking extra food. Convent kitchens were tightly watched, and stealing was considered both a mortal sin and a betrayal of your sacred vows. So instead of candy under the bed, your secret stash might be, what? An extra turnip? If modern kids get grounded for stealing cookies, imagine being spiritually damned for nibbling a potato. Basically, medieval convent dining was like a nightmare diet camp where the counselors cheered every time you starved yourself thinner. Bon appétit. The silent treatment. If you thought convent life sounded lonely already, buckle up. Child nuns were often required to take vows of silence, or at least abide by silence hours. Imagine being 12, trapped in a stone building with 30 other girls your age, and not allowed to gossip, laugh, or whisper secrets. The only sound was chanting, bells, and the occasional passive-aggressive cough from a nun 3 rows down. Some convents enforced this silence with brutal creativity. If a girl broke the rule and got caught talking, she might be forced to kneel on cold stone floors for hours or wear a wooden board around her neck with "talker" carved into it. Basically, medieval dunce cap energy. And you can forget about bonding. Friendship itself was suspicious because it might lead to sinful attachment. So if you found someone you actually liked, the system worked overtime to shut it down. Silence wasn't just a rule, though. It was psychological control. The idea was to crush your individuality until you were nothing but a voice in the choir, interchangeable and obedient. No small talk, no venting, no jokes, no, OMG, did you see what Sister Margaret just did? Just endless internal monologues you couldn't share. So yes, childhood in a convent meant spending your formative years being told that speaking your mind was spiritually dangerous. Middle school group chats don't look so bad now, do they? The creepy relic obsession. Okay, here's where it gets extra weird. Convents loved collecting relics, bones of saints, pieces of cloth supposedly touched by holy figures, random objects passed off as sacred. And guess who got roped into taking care of these relics? Yep, the child nuns. Imagine being 11 and told to polish a finger bone of Saint whoever. Drop it? Eternal damnation. Some convents even made the girls kiss or sleep beside relics as a form of devotion. Nothing like tucking yourself in at night next to a shriveled hand wrapped in velvet. Sweet dreams. And here's the kicker. Relics weren't always real. Some were just ordinary objects hyped up by the church. But the children didn't know that. To them, every cracked skull fragment or moth-eaten robe was untouchably holy. Handling them was nerve-wracking, because one clumsy move could make you both clumsy and spiritually corrupt. So while normal kids collected dolls or pebbles, convent girls collected bits of dead saints and prayed over them like cosmic homework. Childhood toy chest versus reliquary? Let's just say one of those is slightly less fun at sleepovers. Groomed for visions. One of the creepiest parts about child nuns? They weren't just expected to behave, they were expected to become mystics. Adults in charge often pushed these girls into extreme fasting, endless prayer, and sleep deprivation, all under the belief that this might open them to divine visions. Basically, the convent version of a psychedelic trip, but without the consent, snacks, or fun music. So, a 12-year-old who fainted from hunger might be told she'd just had a holy vision. If she woke up babbling nonsense, the abbess might parade her around as proof of God's grace. And the pressure was immense. If you didn't have visions, you weren't devout enough. If you did have visions, congratulations, your half-starved brain just became the convent's new marketing strategy. Some girls figured this out early and leaned into it, telling elaborate stories of angels and demons to gain status. Others broke down completely, losing touch with reality because they'd been trained to doubt their own minds. Either way, it was a trap. Your body was policed, your voice silenced, and now even your dreams weren't safe. They belonged to the church. Meanwhile, outside the convent walls, kids your age were chasing goats, dancing at village fairs, or sneaking kisses behind haystacks. Inside, you were hallucinating on an empty stomach while everyone clapped. Childhood goals, right? The dowry scam. Let's not forget the money. Families didn't just dump daughters in convents for free. It was a whole financial game. To secure a spot for your little girl, you had to pay a nun's dowry. It was usually cheaper than marrying her off to some grumpy nobleman, but it was still a fat sack of coins. And once paid, the convent essentially owned your child. Here's the kicker. Richer families could buy better treatment. A wealthy girl might get a private cell, more food, and nicer robes. Poorer girls? They were the unpaid labor force, working fields, scrubbing floors, or sewing until their fingers bled. So much for equality under God. And sometimes families got sneaky. If a daughter turned out too rebellious, they might force her into a convent against her will, dowry or not. Once the money changed hands, the girl was trapped. Even if she begged to leave, her parents wouldn't dare lose the investment. So yes, in medieval convents, children weren't just spiritual brides, they were financial pawns. Your holiness depended less on prayer and more on how deep your family's purse was. Basically, convent life was the medieval version of pay to win. The secret punishments. You'd think all this piety came with some compassion, right? Nope. Discipline inside convents could be brutal, especially for child nuns who dared to rebel. Disobedience might mean being locked in a freezing cell, forced to whip yourself, or spending the night lying on the chapel floor. Some convents even had penance rooms, which sound like cozy confession booths, but were really isolation chambers designed to break your spirit. And of course, the punishments weren't always about disobedience. Sometimes they were about keeping you humble. Did you sing too sweetly and get compliments? Punishment. Did you look too healthy after a fast? Punishment. Basically, any sign of individuality was crushed under the guise of holiness. The cruelty was carefully wrapped in spiritual language. It wasn't abuse. It was discipline for the soul. But to the kids living it, it was just pain dressed up as prayer. Imagine being 11, locked in a pitch-black room, reciting prayers while your stomach growled and your knees ached. Holiness didn't feel like heaven. It felt like detention from hell. So yeah, child convent life wasn't just silent prayer and boiled cabbage. It was punishment as therapy, with a side of trauma for dessert. The forbidden friendships. Humans are social creatures, kids especially. Give them a hallway and they'll invent tag, hide and seek, or at least whisper a secret. But in convents, even friendship was suspect. 2 girls who got too close. Immediate red flag. The church feared particular attachments, which was their way of saying, if you laugh too hard with someone, you're basically married to the devil now. So abbesses kept an eagle eye on young nuns. If you were caught chatting too long with one friend, you might be reassigned chores across the convent to break the bond. Some records even describe abbesses intentionally stirring drama between girls so no one got too attached. It's like Mean Girls, except your principal is Jesus, and the cafeteria only serves lentils. And let's be honest, when you lock dozens of teenagers behind stone walls, rumors and crushes are inevitable. The church's paranoia made everything worse. A giggle in the dormitory? Suspicious. A glance held too long? Scandalous. Girls who formed close bonds risked punishment, shaming, or being branded as spiritually corrupt. So instead of building the kind of friendships that help kids survive adolescence, convent girls were trained to distrust each other. Imagine your childhood sleepovers replaced with constant suspicion. Every hug, every whispered joke, every smile policed. Basically, Hogwarts without the magic. Just Dolores Umbridge forever. Death in the cloister. Here's the darkest twist. Once a girl was locked in, death was often the only way out. Child nuns grew up behind convent walls, and many never saw their families again. If you died young, and plenty did, thanks to malnutrition, disease, or overwork, your funeral was held right there in the convent. Sometimes you were buried under the very floors you scrubbed. Talk about job security. The scariest part? Girls were taught to welcome death. Dying pure was considered a blessing, proof that your short life had been lived for God. Instead of being mourned as children who never got to grow up, they were celebrated as little martyrs. Imagine being 12, coughing up blood, and hearing your abbess say, "Don't worry, this is actually the best thing that could happen to you." Comforting. And those grim lock-in ceremonies we talked about earlier? They came full circle. The child who had been symbolically buried alive at her entry might literally be buried within those same walls a few years later. The convent became womb, prison, and tomb all in one. It's haunting to think about. Outside the convent, children were running through fields, climbing trees, and making mischief. Inside, their peers were wasting away, praised for dying young and silent. Basically, it was childhood rewritten as a horror story, and no one outside the cloister ever saw it happen. Erased from history. The most disturbing truth? Most of these child nuns vanished from history altogether. Their names rarely survived beyond convent records, and their lives were reduced to lines about dowries, vows, or deaths. If a girl had visions, she might make it into a saint's biography. If not, she disappeared. No stories, no legacy, nothing. And this wasn't an accident. The church wanted obedience, not individuality. These children weren't remembered as people with dreams, personalities, or rebellions. They were remembered as numbers in a ledger, prayers in a schedule, bodies in a cloister. Their humanity was intentionally erased so the institution could shine brighter. Think about it. You were taken as a child, locked away, silenced, punished, and possibly dead by 20. And when historians finally stumbled on your records, it was just, Sister Margaret, entered age 8, died age 16, pious. That's it. Your entire life summed up in a sentence shorter than a tweet. So the next time someone paints medieval convents as serene gardens of peace, remember the kids whose lives were swallowed whole by those stone walls. The disturbing truth about child nuns isn't just what they endured, it's how thoroughly they were forgotten. You've just survived another trip through history's weirdest nightmares. So don't leave me trapped in this convent alone. Hit that subscribe button before some medieval abbess decides silence is your only option. Seriously, it's free. It keeps the channel alive, and it's way less painful than a vow of eternal fasting. Subscribe now, and I'll keep digging up the dark, bizarre, and forbidden stories that history tried to bury.